Hi guys, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for the reading of Mobius with Richard Thieme. He's joined tonight by Max Kilger. My name's Emily. I work at Eat My Words Books, which you can find us in Northeast Minneapolis. We are open for in-store browsing, and then you can also find us on our cool new online store where you can buy a copy of Mobius. And before we get into the reading tonight, I just wanted to share a little bit about our authors here who are joining us. Richard Thieme is an author and professional speaker who addresses the security and intelligence issues as they affect our humanity. He has published 5 books and keynoted security conferences in 14 countries. Max Kilger is an associate professor in practice in the Department of Information Systems and Cybersecurity at the University of Texas at San Antonio. He has over 20 years of experience in the area of information security, concentrating on the social and psychological factors motivating malicious online actors, hacking groups, and cyber terrorists. Thank you guys so much for joining us.
Thank you, Emily.
Yeah. And so we're going to turn it over here just for a little bit to Richard, and who's going to read an excerpt from his book, Mobius, a Memoir.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here, and thank you for hosting. I appreciate it very much. And I'll do a short reading, maybe 2, maybe 3, but probably 1 or 2. The first one is to give a flavor of Mobius and his attitude. It comes from the very beginning of the book, chapter 1, Welcome to My World, where he begins to try to help the reader understand what it is like to have been assimilated into the culture of the intelligence community, where he has spent several decades as a professional, and most of the time loving his work. He says, he says, it's show and tell time. Here is an example of how things work. One autumn rainy day, and when is it not raining in the Netherlands in autumn? I found myself sitting near an airline pilot in a hotel restaurant in Amsterdam. He was alone in a booth, and I was at a nearby table, and no one else was eating there. So I struck up a conversation. The hotel was near the airport. I was flying out the next day after stopping over to meet someone on the way back from Kuala Lumpur. We met at the central station and walked among the tourists, keeping inside the shelter of the loud crowds. I was mindful, of course, of directional mics like in the conversation. The rain thinned the crowd, but would not impede the audio if they used good equipment. When we were done, we went to a bar at the top of the nearby Doubletree, my choice because of, yes, the warm chocolate chip cookies at the desk. I wasn't staying there, so I had to sweet talk the clerk into giving me one. Then we had a beer in the rooftop bar overlooking the Oosterdok and the canals to the south. The glass windows were wet and the sky was befogged, but the view was still beautiful. We looked like 2 normal people exchanging insignificant words. The pilot in the restaurant had been recently flying routes in the Intermountain West, up and down the Wasatch Front. That means he flew locally in the States. What are you doing here? I asked. I come here for the beer, he laughed. He sipped his Duvel and smacked his lips. That's a Belgian beer, I said. It is, but it's still the best. So then we discussed the local beers. Parentheses. So that's how we do it, you see? Make a joke that does not answer the question, then change the subject. So of course I had no idea who he really was, what he was doing in that hotel, even the truth of the interesting story which follows. And after seeing Catch Me If You Can, I wondered if he was even a real pilot. My work has taught me to distrust everyone. If someone approaches me in a friendly way, I am on guard at once. If a subject is raised about which I know a lot or even something, I excuse myself or segue into chatter about sports. I have a repertoire of jokes that shift the topic easily. I have a million ways of never being truthful. The pilot told me that one day they could see clearly a road being built right into the side of a mountain. It led to a dark shadow on the mountainside that looked like an excavation. He knew from the angle and the light it was not just a shadow. It was something substantial. After 17 years in the air, he said, you learn to see what's down there. It was an entrance of some sort being built into the mountainside. What in the world, he thought. What the hell is that? Then, a few days later, coming back on the same route, He couldn't see it. From 38,000 feet, there was no road, no access to the mountain. There was nothing. The mountain had been a mountain, then it wasn't a mountain, then it was a mountain again. He asked fellow pilots, what was that? Everybody shrugged. Lots of shrugging, changing the subject, giving an answer with no content, a null set of words. I expressed bafflement and joined him in shaking our heads at the unsolvable riddle. But as it happened, that time, I knew what they were building. He had seen an entrance being built into a large skiff. When it was finished, you would enter through a well-camouflaged gate, which is why he couldn't see it the next time he looked. You would come to an elevator bank, and the one on the left would take you down, down, down for what seemed like a long time. And when the door opened, you would exit into a suite of conference rooms with access to telemetry and hardened communications, a well-stocked bar and kitchen, lounges and vending machines, a hushed subterranean cave in the bowels of the earth. Area 51, you think, because we want you to, which keeps your eyes away from the real deal. That story is a metaphor. Get it? That's what we do to everything we can. When it matters, we use resources hidden in black budgets to make the mountains of your landscape look like nothing but mountains. An anomalous observation doesn't connect to anything and disappears like a floater in your eye that days later you don't even remember was there. The coin in the palm of my hand disappears while you're watching. Get as close as you like. You'll never see where it goes. And he carries on from there. Now, checking the time, I'll just mention another one because it's one of my favorite illustrations in the book. You probably can't see it very well, but it's an illustration of a slide. You can see the slide? That's a real slide. That's what real human beings do when they make presentations inside to try to explain and discuss what's really happening. That's a real slide. And this is what I say about it. We often use obfuscation inside too. There are plenty of operations, I'd say most if not all, which no one but those on the team should know exist. If we can't raise the level of clearance to keep out the critics and nitpickers, the crybaby whiners, we'll give a general presentation in the name of transparency and disclosure, and we'll show slides like this. Love that one. And then he goes on to say, an audience will stare and pretend it makes sense. If everyone is confused, we did our job. That was pretty helpful, we'll tell one another, and if someone says it's bullshit, groupthink will shut him down. He'll never get promoted. Conversations will stop when he approaches. He'll find himself shunted off to a job where you have to show up, yes, but the work is irrelevant. He won't be fired, but he'll quit from boredom or despair, or maybe even kill himself. Ahead on the city gate, he will become Game of Thrones-like, or real historical example-like. So someone else will think twice before saying something silly. Just look at the slide, nod as if you understand, and say nothing of substance. After the talk, compliment the speaker, making sure he knows your name. Tell him how helpful he was, one hand on his arm, the other hand out to shake his hand with gratitude and warmth. Seal the deal. Well, that gives you a bit of flavor of his attitude. He's a bit arrogant. He was very arrogant as a child. There's a chapter in which he describes how that emerged for him when he learned how to spy and listen in. But his attitude will alter in the course of the book. And the person with whom he intertwines his life is a woman named Penny, who he met in their early 20s, and they were lovers for a while, but they after he started going away and then coming back in 6 months or a year, they maintained a friendship. They stopped being lovers, but they stayed friends all their lives until toward the end of the book, when there is a climactic event in which he discloses who he has really been and where he has really been going when he went out of town. See if I have time. I have time for just maybe one paragraph, give you a flavor of Penny. This is the last paragraph of the chapter called Penny, an Introduction. I remember now, or think I do, how at that lunch her eyes followed me into my depths. We frequently looked into each other's eyes. I didn't know what it meant at the time. I was focused on getting the details right, creating a reasonable facsimile of what I would be doing if what I said was true. My energy was directed at creating a scenario. That took away maybe 20% of my attention. Another 20% was gone because of how it felt to be so close to her thighs under the table. That's when he got down on his knees to fix the table so it wouldn't shake. I did not kiss her yet, not until later that week, after I picked her up at work and we had dinner out and returned to her apartment. But I hugged her goodbye and she felt like a revelation in my arms. And the scent of her hair filled me with expectations. And I dreamed that night of how she would feel under me as I raised myself on my hands to look at her face, as I kept thrusting, making sure I controlled myself to bring her to a peak as she tumbled into love with me and made the little noises that we love. Okay, so that's enough to give you a sense of this wonderful book I've written that I loved writing, but you're not supposed to fall in love with your own writing. But I've waited a quarter century to write this book, gathering the information and the nuance that is in it. And that's about it for the reading part. Now I'm going to open it up to Max Kilger. Max is a longtime friend and a very respected colleague, and there he is. And Max has designed some wonderful questions, which I thought were perfect, the key insights that drive the entire narrative. And Max, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, good evening, Richard. So I guess I'd like to start with talking about, on the back cover of your book, you quote a senior NSA veteran's advice: the only way you can tell the truth is through fiction. Can you explain to your readers what you mean by this?
Yes, let me give you an example from an earlier story I wrote, which illustrates the point, I think, perfectly. I wrote a story called Break Memory from the point of view of an intelligence professional, again, concerned with mastery and domination, which are the essential drives of the culture. And you come to a paragraph where he says, let me tell you what we do. Now, maybe it wasn't a Break Memory. Maybe it was in Zero Day Roswell. But at any rate, they're both in the collection of short stories called Mind Games. And he says, let me tell you what we do. And then he lists a lot of things that he says, this is what we do inside the intelligence community. And some of them were quite controversial at the time. They were speculative for some. But I knew that every single thing in that list was accurate. The story was published around 2006, I think, in a magazine and then included in the collection. And I think Snowden was around 2010-ish. And once Snowden had made his revelations, I was surprised to see someone had made a photo of that whole paragraph and affixed it to a link which went to Snowden's revelations and put it on the internet. And he said, take a look at this. And so what he was illuminating was that I had written in fiction what Snowden had the balls to say in nonfiction. So Snowden is in Moscow and I'm in Minneapolis. Because when you write fiction, you not only have plausible deniability, you do intermix, as I do throughout Mobius, truths, half-truths, and some far-fetched tales. And the point is, once you're writing fiction and you are telling the reader it is fiction, there may be an awful lot of truth in it. How can there not be? But Mobius is like that. And that advice from that NSA senior was serious. He joked, he said, he said, fiction is the only way you can tell the truth now. But that followed a statement that you understand that you can never discuss what we talk about. And the we was a collection of contractors, independents like myself, intelligence professionals from a couple of agencies who were very concerned after 9/11 because the law changed. And once the law changed, the Constitution was altered in its interpretation to approve the law that was changed. And there is a scene in Mobius, which I believe is reasonably accurate, when Executive Order 12333, 12333, it's called, was read in the director's office for the first time. And he said, we have a new directive. And the person who made that statement to me said the silence was so thick you could cut it with a knife, because these were senior professionals who had spent their life believing that there were certain things we didn't do that broke the law or violated the Constitution. And the new executive order said that they could now do them. And that is some of what Snowden revealed through programs like PRISM and others. So what we discussed for about 2 years, and I co-led that group, but I won't name anybody else in it, was whether there was a way to reframe the ethical implications of any ethical or moral understanding of what it was that was now being done, because it so broke the norms of the past to support new actions. And it wasn't just Bush. Obama was more Bush than Bush. It was the inauguration of a new way of doing things, which I had been writing for many years, was going to be mandated of necessity by the technologies, which were reframing our cultures and therefore our behaviors. And so as we discuss these issues, I did not ever knowingly traffic in confidential information, nor ever have confidential secret documents in my hands. But we discussed issues. And so it was in that context that the senior professional said, you can't discuss this stuff unless you write fiction. Fiction is the only way you can tell the truth. And people who have been writing prose for many generations have done the same thing.
Wow. So that sounds really interesting. That's quite a quote. So it sounds like the inspiration for some of the stories and plot twists in the book, some of them might come from real life.
I would guess that was a fair inference, because as he keeps saying, he says even when you tell stories, because Mobius is really clear, his life is spent making up personas that he presents to people in order to facilitate transactions which enable information and energy to pass seamlessly between the two of them. And he does that by creating stories, making up scenarios. And it's inevitable that when you make up a story, you're going to reveal who you are, even when you're making up a contrary story that is designed to deceive others and make them not know who you are. They're going to know who you are by the nature of the story that you tell, because it comes from your psyche. So the fictional story is true, but the other part of it, which you might guess, Max, is that for 25 years, I've worked closely with people in the security world, not only in this country, but all over the world. And I've worked with some in the intelligence community. And I brought to those transactions, I brought to those relationships my prior 20 years as an Episcopal clergyman and my empathy. And I understood, because of my empathy, which thank God I've had all my life, who they were and what the impact of the work was and what it could do and the mixture of motivations that inevitably impelled them through life. So of course, all of that finds its way into this book, 25 years of listening closely as a friend, confidant, and counselor to people in the security world about so many different things. And I tried to do that in a way that honored them but at the same time did justice to the genuinely serious impact the nature of the work had on them.
Wow, that's amazing. So I'm curious. The book, the name of the book is Mobius, and that also happens to be the code name of the main character, Nick. Is there some symbolism in that name that you could share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at the cover of the book, a beautiful cover designed by Harvey Tillis. It pays to know somebody since 6th grade. That was Harvey, he's the photographer. And down here at the bottom, see if I can point to it, right here, you will see, I don't know if you can see it because it's faint, but there's a Mobius strip. And a Mobius strip is a wonderful geometrical form designed by, I believe, Mobius. And it has one edge. It looks like it has two edges, as it does kind of a figure eight, but it has just one edge. And Mobius uses that as a metaphor throughout the book for the fact that even when you launch yourself into what you believe are fictional or created scenarios, creating cover stories, creating background and backdrops for what you present yourself to be, and creating the personas which have to be seamlessly melded with those presentations, you always somehow, as I was saying, wind up coming back to yourself. So he uses it, I don't know if it's mathematically sound or not, but it seemed to me a good metaphor for the fact that no matter where we go in life, we wind up coming home to ourselves. And in a way, that is the arc of the entire narrative. His ultimate search for the core self, if there is one, he doesn't even know if there is. And that's a good example of when you ask, is it true? It was an intelligence professional of about 25 years experience who said, I have been so many different people over the course of the life of my life, I don't even know who I am anymore. And so that depth and degree of truth permeates the book. And that's what he had in mind. He keeps trying to be other people. And I will say as an aside, I mentioned I was a clergyman. What is it to be a clergyman but to be assimilated into a persona which you then have to learn to present to facilitate information and flow and energy in a similar way? The dynamics of the presentation of the persona of a priest or a minister or a rabbi or whatever, and in fact, almost any social role that you have, are identical, I think, to what an intelligence professional has to do at a higher level, meta level. And what we learned in the ministry is don't ever really fuse the flesh to the bone. Don't confuse yourself for who people project onto you out of what they think you are or who you are, or you're going to go down. Because there's some other self in there of which this manifestation in your work is merely one part. And so know yourself is necessary for the work of ministry if you're going to do it successfully. And it is the same imperative for the intelligence work that Mobius does. You have to know who you are in contrast to who you present yourself to be, or else you start to mistake yourself for who people think you are, and then you get lost in the wilderness of mirrors, and then you never get out.
So that sounds like having relationships might be kind of complicated. And so, for example, I noticed the relationship between the main character, Nick, and his often on-again girlfriend, Penny, is featured throughout the book. It seems like they lead parallel lives. Penny is rewarded by seeking out damaged individuals in her work as a social worker, and Nick is similarly rewarded by uncovering damaged individuals working for other governments. Would you like to talk just a little bit about that?
Well, you say it so beautifully. You're such a good reader, such a good reader, because you get it. You get it all. You always have, and you bring all this awareness to your own life and work and friendships. That's why you're such a great companion to have. And yes, Penny is interwoven with him, and she starts to go down as she burns out. The book skips through her life as it skips through his, and just listening and absorbing. She's attracted to these broken people. She says later she sees her face better in a broken mirror. And Mobius has to come to terms with the fact that as he confronts her with that reality, that, look, Penny, this is who you are. This is what you've sought out. He has to confront the fact of, well, what does that say about her relationship with me? Because she has been his primary relationship. She's been his anchor. He always somehow comes home to her, comes back to her. And even though they stop being sexual lovers and they both have other relationships throughout their life, she's the one whose name functions for him almost like an incantation. When he wakes in some hotel room and has to remember where he is and who he's supposed to be, which those of us who've been on the road a lot is not an unusual scenario. And he says, Penny, 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 trying to connect with some other person across the abyss he has created for his life. So it seems ironic that a social worker and a spy might have similar trajectories through life, but not really. Not when you think about what it is they both do, because like Penny, Mobius just wanted to be a good guy doing good guy stuff. He wanted to protect people. He wanted to help people. And of course, he got in, as so many of us do, deeper than he thought. And so the traumatic feedback from his work had an impact he hadn't anticipated. And as one of the lines in the book is, what do you do if you've discovered that you have sold your soul, but you didn't know it until after you had signed the document for the transaction? And intelligence work is no joke. There is a true quote in there from an intelligence professional in the narrative, in which he says, do you know that in the DO, the Directorate of Operations, the CIA, we were inordinately proud of having the highest rate of alcoholism, divorce, something else, and suicide in the agency. And he went on to say, I carry around 23 suicides of people in the agency, the most recent of which have been by people who couldn't live with what they knew. And there was someone, a ranking officer, one of the agencies, who, as we walked back to our hotel after both giving speeches, going to reception, I'll never forget how he looked when he looked into my eyes and he said, I've lost my faith. I've lost my faith. Well, that's the challenge for helpers, helping people, as well as the intelligence community. You go into it as a young person with one way of thinking about it, and then life brings you along that road that brings you back to your real self, and you have to somehow justify, literally like a margin, what you've done with who you thought you were. And yeah, so I loved being very clear and sometimes very ironic, I thought, about how those two intertwined. And Penny, of course, as I say, as Mobius says, Mobius says is based on multiple relationships, but they're not that multiple in my life. And there is a Penny that a lot of people know in the security world because she adopted that world. And I am fond of her and respect her absolutely at the top of the game. But that it's not that Penny.
Okay, so let's follow up. You spend some time early in the book talking about Nick and his entrance into the intelligence community. You talk about his experience with his spotter and his personality that makes him attractive to them. Does this actually happen in real life?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. One of the comments I got back from someone who read this book is, he said, I can't quote it exactly, but he said, the first 30 pages describes my head and my life turned inside out. Mobius says he has a theory that a lot of the people he meets in the business learned in dysfunctional households to not tell, not trust, not feel. And there are a lot of different niches in the intelligence community, as you know. I mean, many different things you can do, and they don't all require the same thing, but certain kinds of work in intelligence do, and he was perfectly suited for it. That's very accurate. That's an accurate observation. not exclusively of everybody in the intelligence world, but and they are identified by people. Not so much these days. After 9/11, the lines of recruitment into the agencies went around the block at campuses. The world changed, the culture changed, everything changed. But before 9/11, it was not uncommon in the 50s and 60s, and it's still part of the game for paid spotters to identify people who make likely candidates and make the kind of proffer that Mobius received from his philosophy professor at a unnamed liberal Ohio campus. Yeah. Okay.
All right. So Nick struggles with the element of trust in his life. He trusts his fellow colleagues from the other foreign intelligence services overseas, and yet he does not. He leans towards trusting his colleagues from his own agency, yet he says betrayals and plots within plots that manipulate his colleagues by others in the intelligence community abound. Can you just give us a bit of flavor about that?
Yeah, well, that's absolutely an accurate statement. You can't trust anyone. There is a quote in there, and again, that was a quote of a person in a place who, when the British liaison was saying, "These are our friends, special relationship, etc." He was interrupted by the deputy SIGINT guy who said, "Excuse me, you're forgetting something. We don't have friends. We don't really have allies. We have targets." And that's why it was not such a shock when Snowden revealed, "Oh, we're spying on all our friends. We're spying." Well, everybody is spying. You just assume everything is overheard, and you live that way. So you learn to speak in code, and you learn to say things like, "Well, you know that guy," and he says, "You know that guy," and he says, "No, not that other, the other guy, the guy we were talking about on Tuesday." "Oh, that guy, yeah, that guy." Like a mafia don, like mafioso talking to another. It undermines your ability to trust. And when I did a speech at DEF CON, which is on YouTube, called "Playing Through the Pain: The Impact of Security and Intelligence Work on Professionals," the dark truth of it, that was something that came back to me from a number of people, that they had to be so careful never to reveal the truth. And there are lots of stories like that about how it undermines trust, the basic trust that people think they can assume about people. One of my favorite stories, which is also true, was when someone finally got the clearances that he wanted and was accepted for work at one of the agencies. And he came to work the first day, and that was the first time he learned that both his mother and his father worked at that agency. Well, if what does that do to trust? If the family narrative has been a lie for his entire life, and that is at the heart of the book too. That's one of the arcs of the narrative, that what other people call lying is a cover story and necessary confidentiality. And that's why Mobius says, as Clapper said before Congress, I told them the least untruthful thing I could. And some would think, "Oh, you lied to them in the best possible way." Well, no, I wasn't lying. I was maintaining appropriate cover and confidentiality because I could not speak of confidential matters in a non-cleared setting, which the Congress was. So I couldn't say it. So this catch-22 is at the heart of the life, that you do have to learn to be constantly wary and aware, and within the agency, as his mentor says to him on many occasions, using stories to illustrate his point, which are also true fiction. These are things that happened, and these are things you have to know about in order to find your way inside the labyrinth of the agency as well. Not easy work. It's not easy work, right?
No, it is not. So let's turn to Nick. With all of his skills and expertise at shaping and predicting human behavior, that's really what he was an expert at, being a field officer. Nick fails at the one event that matters most to him. At last, finally telling Penny the truth about himself and enlisting her sympathy and understanding. So why do you think that he failed at this?
Well, it even says at the end of that is one of the chapters of which I am most proud. It's called Shooting the Gap, and if you know football, it means you come in and you sack the quarterback. And Nick thought he had a good offensive line in front of him. That is his practice and his life, but he didn't. And she shot the gap, and next thing he knew, he's on his back. He had that traumatic event, which occupies the last several chapters, when he was assigned to a base in Poland after 9/11 to interrogate people on the basis of a class he taught in interrogation, but it turned through mission drift into torture. He was there torturing people. And when we say torture, you can joke and say they're going in a swimming pool by waterboarding. The way of making light of torture. It's torture. And that is one of the motivating facts of my life, that I was talking to people who were tortured, and I was talking to people who had tortured others before it was in the press, before it was known widely. And this is recounted in Mobius in a way too, where he goes to different medical people, bioethicists, to try to get them to intervene. And they don't, because he has such a confrontation with himself when he was torturing someone. And so at that moment, he feels as if there's nothing left for him to do but to try to tell the truth to the one person who has always accepted him, even though he has lied to her for 37 years about his entire life. He's changed in that he can no longer really see what that is going to do to a normal human being. He has lost touch with what normal human beings think and feel. And thought also, he's counting on her radical codependency, always to take care of him no matter what. And just be able to still love him as a friend after hearing him tell her that he has been lying to her for 37 years about everything. And in fact, that the reason it broke was because he mentioned torture, but now he says, I was there. These are things we do. These are things we did. These are things I did. And he wanted her just to accept that. And it was too big. It was just too big. He had been so assimilated deeply into the culture that brought him to that point that he wasn't able anymore really to understand that someone outside that culture couldn't take it. They couldn't absorb that. And Nick says throughout the book to the reader, I'm trying to tell you what it's like, and you're going to deceive yourself into thinking you know because you're reading words. And he keeps saying, you don't know. You weren't in that room. You didn't smell that room. And it's pretty serious stuff. But the other thing, which I won't give away, is the last line of that chapter, in which he realizes that she saw more deeply than he some other incredibly telling truth about him. And I don't want to give that away because it's a culmination of a major thread of the novel.
Oh, okay. So let's turn to that black site for a second, and the turning point in Nick's career that leads to his downfall. And that involves looking directly into another woman's eyes. How does this shape Nick's perspective forever?
Right, because when you torture people, or in a more mild way, when you recruit them, what are you doing when you're recruiting an agent to betray their family, friends, and country on your behalf? You're turning them into, their only person they can trust at that point is you. You're turning them into an object. And I referred to personas and how they were used before. And I was talking to a wonderful friend in the business. And I said, as a clergyman, you learn to create those personas to facilitate the conversation, so that what I could do is what I've tried to do my whole life: empower people and their autonomy and their freedom and their agency. And he said, yes, and we do the same thing in the agencies, but we do it in order to control people. And the torture is the ultimate control of another human being. You own them. You own their body and you own their soul. And that kind of power over another human being is very critical. And it requires you to continue to objectify them. The Chinese, when they experimented with the Japanese, when they experimented with biological weapons on the Chinese, they called them logs, L-O-G-S. They turned them into objects so that they could do horrific things to them. And it's a higher degree of what we all do when we demonize other people. We turn them into something they're not, which is a fully human being in their own right. And Nick was torturing someone, and they had a hood over her eyes. Now, if you find a book called Cell Without a Number, Prisoner Without a Name by Giacomo Timmerman, who was tortured by the Argentines, he talked about putting a hood on people when they took them to torture so you wouldn't look into their eyes and confront their humanity. And confronting their humanity was confronting your own humanity and confronting the depths of what it was you were doing, one human being to another. And that's what became a pivot point for Nick as he went through this transformation.
Okay, I see Emily is back with us. That must mean we're just about out of time for our conversation, Richard.
Yeah, what's the story, Emily?
I've really enjoyed it, and so I'm going to turn it back over to Emily.
Yeah, well, I'm just popping back up. I think we have more time for a question from you, Max, and then once again, if people want to ask any questions, they can put them in the chat, and then I'll throw those to you guys here in a minute.
Okay, great, Emily. Yeah, I do have one last question for Richard. So, at the end of the book, Nick fails to follow the advice of his most trusted mentor in the intelligence community. And there are significant negative consequences for him. What would you like to say about this? Is there a moral to the story?
Well, the moral is, morals are not black and white. And I tried throughout this book to show, as this mentor tells him an alternative point of view, don't do what you're talking about doing. And why? And all the reasons he gives him are good reasons. I mean, they're legitimate. And that's why 99% of the people don't do it, and for a good reason. And it's kind of similar to why did so many follow this political track or that? Because it was expedient and necessary and an appropriate rationalization that let them, how cognitive dissonance works. Your mind gives you reasons for doing things which aren't the real reasons, but you do them. And I tried to show that the very nature of this work, which I tried to really get my mind around in all of its complexities. I loved writing this book. And obviously I got very close to people who do this work. And obviously there were gray areas for my own work that crossed over into various spheres, put it that way. So I understood that there were complexities, and it's all gray. There's no black and white. And yet, in the end, the individual has to confront who they are and what decision they make, because that's going to declare to the world who they are. And his mentor said, don't worry about that so much. Think of the consequences of what you're doing and the consequences that ensue when he goes to a lawyer to discuss the possibility of being a whistleblower. The lawyer tells him the truth. He says, I've talked to plenty of whistleblowers. I've talked to people who thought about it. And they say, be sure you know what they're going to do. You know yourself. I remember I was on an interview show 30 years ago, almost 25, with Wayne Youngquist in Milwaukee when I first went in the speaking business. And he advised people on political campaigns. And Wayne said to me, he said, what you're saying, Richard, is the same thing I tell people before they throw their hat in the ring. Know yourself. Because what they're going to do to you when you run for office is going to be unlike any other experience you've ever had in your life. And when you become a whistleblower, what they're going to do to you is going to ream you a new one every single day. And there's only one factor which will enable you to persist through that trajectory and endure it. So I wanted Nick's mentor to have 100% credibility in saying those things for good reason. He was right. Don't do it. Don't do it. And if you do it, you're going to find yourself just completely alone. And Nick is clear because of his upbringing and the family he had, that he went into the intelligence community in part to find family. The way I went into the ministry, coming from a similar background, to find community, to find support. And if he turned into a whistleblower, kind of in the way when I left the Episcopal Church as a minister and started speaking and writing full time, I think you can count on the fingers of one maimed hand the number of people in the Episcopal Church who ever spoke to me again. You're gone. You're not one of them anymore, and you are confronting them with what they choose not to do in order to have a complex whole view instead of a partial view of what it is that they're doing. So I wanted to give his mentor full due for making the decision for the right reasons from his point of view, just that Nick couldn't do the same thing because those reasons no longer were the primary motivation of his soul. So he did discover he was or had a soul and a conscience. And then when you discover that, I don't know what else you can do except live out of that awareness and realization. And that brings us to Emily. Looks very serious and somber.
Sorry, I was just listening intently.
Yeah, I know you were.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it looks like
I think this is a really good idea, the narrative. And I hope I didn't give away too much of the book because it's so beautifully written, so well written, so clever, so ironic, so humorous, that even if one knew every word, one would profit, as I did, by editing the damn thing over and over and over and over again. I just loved reading it every time I read it. But that is mere self-love, I guess. So we'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I did have one question for you. This is my own personal question, but I know how much work you put into making the book itself, and that it's not your typical book. So I was wondering if you could share with us a little bit more about the illustrations and the actual putting together of the physical book that you've made. That's so unique and special.
It was, as somebody says in the book, about a very difficult decision they had to make in the intelligence community. Once you know what it is you're going to do, it's effortless. It was all the work getting up to knowing what is the right thing to do is the work. As I've said to Max, I spent a quarter century engaging passionately, wholeheartedly with these communities and absorbing the stories and the work and doing some work that made me not just a bystander but a participant. I've been there, and yet I couldn't write about it until I could conceive of a fictional way to address it. And so once I realized that, look, I'm 76 years old. I have nothing to protect. I have nothing to hold back. It's all out there, who I am. It's in all my works. You can see transparently through those works who I am. It's complex, but it's all right there. Nothing is hidden. And once I passed over into, I know what I can do. I can splice the way I learned to work with personas in the religious world with the way I have learned the intelligence professionals I know best work with personas in their work. And once those fused, I had the voice of Mobius. And once I had the voice, I sat down and I wrote the first draft in 4 months. It just poured out because it's all been there. And one of the great things about being older is your long-term memory gets sharper and more vivid. Your short-term memory, I'm lucky I found my way to the water glass, but your long-term memory, it's there. And these things are there, and it was time to integrate them into a way of articulating with complexity and depth, which is my gift, I think. It's all I know how to do. I'm not practical. What I have learned. And so then I rewrote it in 3 months, and then I thought, okay, now I'm ready to go. And then I start talking to agents, and I'll tell you the simple truth. Just about every agent I talked to said, what we really want are books by women and about women, and we want books by and about LGBTQA plus and other indigenous people and marginalized people. And one actually said, I want only hashtag actually authentically autistic authors. And I said, I'm a cisgender, old, white male. Is there room for me? And I won't say what I got back from that one, but I said, how about authentically mature? No. So agents and publishers are uninterested in someone that they can't market in a convenient way to fill the niche that they're trying to sell. I'm not going to go into a long thing, which I could do about the publishing industry, but I know how it works, and I know what it is, and I know what it isn't. And so while I went through that necessary process, I finally got to the point the following year where I said, this is too good a book not to have out there. And I rewrote it and rewrote it and rewrote it, cut it down significantly from 105,000 to about 90,000 words. And that was really a plus. Every word you take out improves the manuscript. And then I have my own imprint, which is Exurban Press, which others are going to use as well in the future, I believe. And so that's how you become a boutique publisher. But the book was there. And as I say, every time I went through it, you remove more and more and more. It's like a sculpture. Nobody cares about the marble you carved off the block. All they want to see is the Pieta or the Statue of David that you have discovered in the stone. And that's what I kept trying to do. The words were effortless. Once I crossed over to, I see how I can write this. I see who I am in this book. I can tell the complete truth in fiction. And then, as I say, then it was just sliding down the snow hill, going we, like a little kid.
All the way home.
All the way home.
That's great.
Yeah, so I'm really gratified that the authenticity of the voice and the accuracy of the depiction is what people, some really key people in the industry of many, many years have said this belongs inside every library in the security and intel community. And what the challenge now is how do you market that when there's so little shelf space in the supermarket and everybody's clamoring for the same. So word of mouth marketing and doing shows like this is the only way to do it. It's only been out 2 weeks. So I'm deeply gratified by the validation of the comments people have made.
Yeah, and well, we're really happy to support you and support your book. Again, if you guys haven't bought the book yet, you can buy it through Eat My Words. There's a little purchase button right below here that you can go and it'll take you to our website, or you can visit us in person. My last question for the evening for you, I think it comes from Bob Towner, and it kind of speaks to both of your fields. And, one of the greatest challenges or constant questions in literature is, can you trust the narrator? Can you trust Mobius? And if so, how do you build that trust?
Well, you're just going to have to figure that out for yourself. Because Mobius himself alludes to that. At one point, he said, now here comes a story that he couldn't tell because he had a collapse. He collapsed, and his friend took over the narrative. And he said, just, take it with a grain of salt. And he says, with a wink, but you should have been doing that for the whole narrative. He constantly toys with the reader because he can't, he uses the analogy of Medusa, the Gorgon Medusa, who had snakes on her head. And the myth is that if you looked at Medusa directly, you turned to stone. And who was it who cut off her head, held up his shield, and he looked at her reflection in the shield. And when you look at the reflection, you can cut off the head. And that's a terrific metaphor for reality. You can't look at reality directly because you will turn to stone. And as a point of departure, you can then go on into the things that both Penny and Mobius deal with through their whole lives and see why. Mankind cannot bear too much reality, said T.S. Eliot in the Four Quartets. And so Mobius plays with, I'm going to tell you the least untruthful things I can, but he means that deeply. And he means it not just in the way people take it about a spy, but about a human being who knows that to disclose the reality of who we are and what we do is unbearable. And it has to be seen in a reflection. The reflection is art, the reflection is literature, the reflection is words, the reflection is society and culture itself, which provides symbolic schemes for our brains to apprehend so that we can pretend what we apprehend in our cultures is what's real, and then live in it as if it's real, even though you have a moment of awakening where you know, well, it's not. And that's why Zen adepts call the moment of enlightenment a nightmare in daylight. It's when you see. So that struggle, which permeates Mobius's struggle, permeates mine, but that's because it's the human condition. Bob also, what did he do? My wife brought in a question from Bob. Is your desire to help people one of your main motivations in working on this book? I don't want to claim any greater altruism than anybody else has, but you take what you've got and you put it out there in your lifetime. As I said, I'm 76. I probably don't have another 76 years to go. And so you take everything you've got and you use it on behalf of others and yourself. And was it Rabbi Hillel who said, if I am not for others, if I'm only for myself, who am I? But if I'm not for others, blah, blah, blah. If not now, when? In other words, everything has to be for everybody else and also for yourself in the same way. Genuine love of other is love, proper love of self. So do I desire to help people? Yes, of course. My whole life has been about imparting what I've learned as best I can, and serving as a counselor. A lot of these conversations were what I would call counseling conversations. People learned they could trust my listening and responsiveness in a way that was honed by years and years of practice doing it. So I used to say in the ministry that it was a training program for becoming a more fully human being. And that's because people who came to you thinking they were asking your help, were training you in how resilient, how heroic, how extraordinary they were as human beings. And I learned that was intrinsic to the human condition, not added on. So yeah, I share that, but I also love the quote from George Bernard Shaw that said, life is not a flickering little candle for me, it's a bright torch I've got a hold of for just a moment. And I want it to burn as brightly as it can while I have it in my hand. And then he said, which I have believed deeply for a long time, I want to be all used up when I die. So you're a process. You're not a thing. You're a process in which energy is constantly configuring itself in order to interrelate with the rest of the cosmos. And one day that energy will finally, like a candle, wisp of smoke. So don't hold back, right? You're going to fail at a lot of things, but give everything your best effort.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions?
No, I think that's it. And thank you so much. That's such a great note to end on. I really appreciate that. It's great wisdom, and it's again a very mature author, a very mature, that mature voice. So I'm glad you took the years to
Thank you.
tell this
Hashtag
story.
actually mature. Yeah.
Actually mature. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, well, thank you again all for joining us. And thank you to Max Kilger for fielding some questions and asking some great questions. And to our author, Richard Thieme, congratulations on the release of your book. Again, you can find it at Eat My Words. And yeah, thanks to everyone for joining us.
You're recording this, so this will be available.
Yes, so the second this is done, this exact link will live, as you can just rewatch this forever and ever. So, but I'll send it to you as well. Yeah.
I love listening to myself. Thank you.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, perfect. All right, everyone, have a great night, and thank you for joining.
Thank you, Emily.
Bye. Yeah.
Thanks, Matt.